Hello everyone, and welcome to the final video in our series on unit conversions. And basically what we're going to do today is we're going to see how what we've learned applies to scaling of recipes. So we're going to look at adjusting the yield of our recipe first, right? So the first thing you need to know is what your original yield is and where you want to go, right? We're going to calculate a conversion factor by using the following formula. The new yield over the old yield, new over the old. So if we had a recipe that made 10 portions and we wanted 5, we 10 over 5. So we're dividing the recipe by half. Pretty straightforward, except not all the time do we get nice even divide by 2 or double recipes. We need them more accurate because we need the actual portions so we don't underproduce or overproduce and produce wastage, right? So the first example we have here is what is the conversion factor to change a recipe yielding 75 portions to one yielding 20 portions. So our formula is conversion factor, conversion factor equals new over the old. That's a terrible looking N. New over the old, right? So our new, so there's 75 portions, right? So what is the conversion factor to change a recipe yielding 75 portions? So this 75 portions is the old, right? Because the recipe is already there. It's already making 75 portions. And we want to have 20 portions, right? So then that's the new over. So 20 divided by 75 gives us a conversion factor of 0.266. And if you're rounding, you're going to get to 0.27. Okay? So pretty straightforward if the portion size doesn't change, right? It's one steak, right? So if we need to cook for 2 people, we need 2 steaks, right? We aren't changing the size of the portion. Where we can run into issues is when the portion size changes. So if we have a recipe making so many bowls of soup and we're serving 4-ounce bowls of soup and we want to serve a different number of people with 8-ounce bowls of soup, we can't just use the portion that the recipe put out. We need to calculate the entire yield or total ounces. So we're going to take the total portions and multiply that by the portion size. And you'll see in the next example that I've got coming up here with bread. I think we're calculating the conversion factor for a recipe yielding 4 1-pound loaves of bread to one yielding 110 2-ounce rolls. So we need to figure out really how many total ounces did the original recipe make, and then how many ounces do I need for the final yield. So again, our conversion factor equals new over the old, and our old is 4 1-pound loaves. So let's go like this, 4 times 1 pound, right? And our new is going to need 110 times 2 ounces, right? So you see how the pounds and ounces don't match. Those are 2 totally different portion sizes. So we need to figure out how many ounces. So this one's pretty straightforward. 110 times 2 ounces is going to give us 220 ounces. Now we want to get the same size units because we can't have pounds on the bottom. So we could go 4 times 1 gives us 4 pounds, right? So 4 pounds times 16 ounces in a pound gives us, put it on my calculator, 4 times 16 gives us 64 ounces. So we end up with something that looks like this. So our original recipe, if you want to look at it like this, made 64 ounces of dough. We split it into 4 1-pound loaves, but it made 64 ounces of dough. We want to take that same dough and now change that recipe so we get 220 ounces of dough so that we can make our 110 2-ounce rolls, right? So 220 divided by our 64 ounces is going to give us 3.44 is our conversion factor. So then we would take that number and multiply it times every ingredient in our bread recipe so that we would end up with 220 ounces in the end, right? So once we have that conversion factor, we're going to apply that now to the actual recipe. So we would take every ingredient in the recipe and multiply it times the conversion factor. So our new ingredient quantity is going to be the old ingredient quantity times our conversion factor. So if we had 4 pounds of flour in the original recipe, we multiply that times 3.44 to get how many pounds of flour we need for the new recipe, that it will give us the correct yield that we want, right? Once we've done that, we may need to convert that unit to make it easier to measure. I like giving the example of making soup. And the original recipe called for half a teaspoon of cayenne pepper. And then the new recipe is now calling for 425 teaspoons of cayenne pepper. Well, I don't expect somebody to sit there and measure out 425 teaspoons of cayenne pepper. I want somebody to convert that into cups so they're not spending half an hour measuring cayenne pepper, right? So this is where the unit conversion comes into play. So our example of a recipe we've got, a chicken piccata recipe. So the example wants us to convert the following recipe to serve 12 portions. The current yield, or the old yield, is 100 portions of chicken piccata. We've got our chicken breast, 100 of those. We've got 2¼ pounds of flour. We've got 3 pounds of butter, etc. Right? So the first thing we need to do is figure out our conversion factor, new over the old. And our new is, we want 12 portions, 12 out of 100. So our conversion factor is going to be 0.12, right? So what I'd like to do is build a chart with this recipe, much like what's pictured on your screen here. So here's the chart, and we have our old data. So our old, this is what we figured out so far in here in the green, right? So we've got our chicken breast, or flour, or butter, or lemon juice, everything, and the old recipe, and we're multiplying it times our conversion factor to get our new quantity. Now notice our flour has gone from 2.25 pounds down to 0.27 of a pound. That's difficult to measure, right? So that's why we convert it now to ounces, so it's easier to measure, right? So we use our 1 pound equals 16 ounces multiplied times our 0.27 to get our 4¼ ounces, right? Using one of those conversion methods that we had from the last video. So we go through all of these. So like 0.36 of a pound of butter, I'm probably going to measure ounces, right? Lemon juice, we're going to assume that that is like water. It's a water-like substance, so we can do a straight conversion using our pints to water, or 32 ounces equals a quart, right? Chicken stock, same thing, right? Now, the key one that's a little bit confusing is this 1 jar of capers, right? Well, it's a 28-ounce jar, but that jar of capers is probably 28 ounce in volume, and that's including all of the brine that's with the capers. So what we needed to figure out is actually drain that, weigh the capers, and figure out how much actual capers or the yield we got out of the jar. So before we start converting into ounces, right? Because if we have a 4-quart jar of capers and we only got 28 ounces out of it, we wouldn't just take the 1 jar and multiply times 0.1. We need to figure out exactly how much we're getting out of it. And the same thing goes for the chopped parsley, right? We need to figure out how much parsley we're going to get from a bunch when we chop it, right? How many tablespoons are we going to get out of the bunch of parsley? So up on the slides here, we've got no conversion for each. So the chicken breast, exactly, right? We went from 100 chicken breasts down to 12 chicken breasts. We don't need to change the unit that we're using to measuring that. The rounding obviously depends on the measuring tools available. Measuring the 0.27 of a pound of flour, probably not the easiest, whereas measuring 4 1/4 ounces is probably easier with the tools in the kitchen, right? As I mentioned, lemon juice and stock, we're going to use them as if they were water or water-like substance, right? And the jar, right? We need to do a kitchen test. We need to drain it, weigh the capers that are in there to find out what our actual yield is from the jar first, not just take the measurement that's on the side of the jar, because that's what's in there, brine and capers combined. We don't use the brine, right? So that's going to go down the drain. How much was your actual yield from the capers? And then choice of unit and how much to round can impact the precision of your measurement, right? Like I said, we're not going to sit there and measure out, 425 teaspoons of cayenne pepper when we start scaling recipes. We're going to adjust the unit of measure so that we can be more efficient with our time. All right, well, that's it for our section on unit conversions. We're moving on to yielding on the next one.